This is the Injury Report, presented by NYU Langone Health. Although the Knicks have advanced to the second round of the NBA playoffs, they didn't get through their first-round series against the Sixers without injury. New York forward Bojan Bogdanovic was banged up heading into Game 4 against Philadelphia, and now he's done for the season after having foot surgery. So it's time for another edition of Injury Report, where we discuss Bogey's injury, and we're going to do it with a sports orthopedic surgeon for NYU Langone, Dr. Laith Jazrawi, who joins me now. Dr. Jazrawi, how's it going?
Dexter, it's great to be here. It's Friday, so I'm sure you're happy as well.
Always happy when it's a Friday, and always happy to talk to the great doctors at NYU Langone for the Injury Report. So let's start with this, Dr. Jazrawi. Let's start with his wrist, because it was reportedly sprained toward the end of the regular season, and then an MRI uncovered ligament damage. Did he make it worse by continuing to play in the playoffs, or was he just dealing with pain and managing it as best as he could?
Yeah, that's an easy one. There are certain injuries around the wrist that we know that if it's damaged and you don't get to it right away, it's problematic. And there's a specific subset of those, whether it's a fracture around the wrist, whether it's a specific ligament injury between two bones. You don't fix it right away, you're going to lead to long-term damage in the wrist. So it probably wasn't any of those. The other things it could be is, some sort of tendinitis. And then there are ligaments in the wrist. There's cartilage injuries that you have in the wrist that you don't need to treat right away. So my guess, it's something along those lines, and that he's probably going to have a scope or, a camera inserted into his wrist to either fix or clean up one of those tears.
All right, so those are the options for him there as far as his wrist. But we're also going to talk about his foot and now having surgery. What will this surgery do for Bogdanovic, and what does the timetable for recovery look like for him?
Right. So the question is, when you look at the injury itself, what could he have done? And you try to, get a sense of what is he grabbing. So it looks like he was going below his ankle initially towards his foot. And then you say, well, all right, what could you damage in the foot with that type of injury that would require definitive surgery? And there are a couple of things in athletes that we treat right away. There are fractures, and particularly a fracture of the, one of the bones in the foot, which we typically treat non-operatively in adults who are not, at the elite level in sports. But for athletes, when you fix this particular bone, it happens to be called the fifth metatarsal bone, it leads to quicker recovery and their ability to get back, to, the game quicker. So my sense, it's possibly that, or if he's having surgery that quick, it's going to be some type of fracture, in his foot. So that's where I'm leaning. It's unlikely that it's going to be just an isolated ligament injury, especially when they talked about the foot. There is another specific ligament that you can damage in the foot that requires operative intervention fairly immediately. But the fact that he could walk off the court would go away from that. Typically, these base of the fifth metatarsal fractures are the ones where they can walk and they can, actually feel okay. But those are the ones, in athletes we're going to operate on to get them back quicker.
All right, it's good. He can be back quickly, and we'll get to a little bit more of that later. And you mentioned about when he got injured with the foot, because right after he entered Game 4, he gets tied up with Nick Batum. You talked about him walking off. He limped off the court in pain. And then on Wednesday, he had surgery on that left foot and reportedly will be reevaluated in 3 months. SNY's Ian Begley reported that testing showed foot surgery was definitely needed. How do you determine whether or not surgery would be needed with a foot injury?
Yeah, so you got to first, what is it? And I think, I'm in this position a lot, where we try to figure out, okay, we have foot injuries. What foot injuries need surgery? Okay, so you can go down the list of these things. Let's start with fractures. There's only one fracture in the foot that these athletes get that, typically requires surgery. It's this fifth metatarsal fracture. So odds are I'm leaning towards that, especially if they said foot. And looking at the video and the game footage, I'm leaning towards that. Now, are there other fractures? Well, the other bones in the foot, you can pretty much typically treat non-operatively for the most part. And they're relatively rare. So I doubt it was that. A ligament injury in the foot, there's only one ligament in the foot that if you injure, it leads to sort of widening of some of the bones in the foot. Doubtful it's that, but certainly it's the same concept. If it's that, it needs to be immediately fixed. So, it's one of those two things. Now, if it was his ankle and they're just saying his foot, there are ankle fractures obviously that need to be fixed. So my sense, it's some sort of ankle fracture, broken bone. But the great thing about those things, they reliably come back. So I'm not worried about him not coming back. Same thing with his wrist. I think these are just things that he's going to get fixed, and he's going to come back 100%.
All right, and that's a positive news for Knicks fans there. But I think something else, Doctor, that fans want to think about in terms of they'll question when they look at these injuries with Bojan Bogdanovic. They'll say, hey, why was a wrist injury something that he was able to play through, but not a foot injury? Obviously, two different parts of your body, but why the difference that you see some guys play through a wrist injury, but not foot injuries like this one?
Well, there are things that need definitive surgery right away that it doesn't matter. One, they can't play with it. Two, it needs to be fixed. So there are certain criteria we know without fixing it, it will end up not doing well. Now, there are certain things in the wrist and in the foot that can be treated non-operatively initially or not an urgency to go to surgery. So you question the athlete, can they play with bracing? Can they play with taping? And if they can, and they can function at the level they want to function, and trust me, with basketball, it's all about the stats. It's all about the numbers. These athletes, if they're not playing close to their top, self, they don't want to play because it affects those numbers. Granted, playoff time, different story. These athletes may be willing to risk slightly lower stats, and as long as it's not something that's going to hurt them in the future. And trust me, this is not one of those cases in terms of the wrist. My sense, it's this, ligament tear in his wrist joint that needs to be scoped, and there was no issue with him waiting and not getting surgery. Now, the foot's a different story. There are foot things that you can watch and you can wait on, but there are certain foot things like fractures that he's not going to be able to play on a fracture. So why even lace him up or boot him? He's just not going to be able to play effectively. So it's a waste to have him in the game. And we know it needs surgery. So let's get him into surgery and start the recovery. So if he can't play with it, then why are you waiting? Just get it fixed and let's go. And then makes sense. Just get the wrist done at the same time or within that period so he can recover with both those injuries.
Yep, and talking about recovery leads me to this because Knicks training camp will begin late this summer. You said that you think he'll be fine. How likely is it that he will be recovered enough from both surgeries to begin training camp on time?
All right, so we can go through. Let's say it's this foot fracture. Normally, if we do this and put a screw across it, you're looking at some 3 months to get back. So easy for that. Wrist stuff, well, let's say it's a clean out of his wrist with a cartilage injury. Again, 3 months with that. Now, if you fix it, you're looking at a 4 to 6 month, time period. So let's say they had to fix it, put stitches in the ligament to help heal it. I think that even he may miss early, preseason, but for the most part, I think he's right on target to be back with the team and all healed up.
All right. This is all good news for Knicks fans who are excited about making the second round of the playoffs. Sounds like Bojan Bogdanovic will be fine and should be ready for the start of next season. We will see how all that plays out. That is Dr. Laith Jazrawi joining me from NYU Langone. Doctor, appreciate your time here on the Injury Report. Appreciate you so much.
Great. Dexter, have a great weekend, and thank you for having us.
You too. Thank you.